Have you ever looked at your credit card statement and felt that hit in your stomach? Maybe you wondered if those impulse purchases were really worth it. I know I have. Or perhaps you found yourself juggling multiple credit cards trying to just keep up with the payments. Well, today we're diving deep into a topic that affects so many of us, and that's credit card use, and I'm going to dare say it, abuse. Listen, many of us have been in this credit card hole. At the end of the show, I'm going to tell you my story, and I'm going to give you some specific things you can do to get yourself out of that credit card debt spiral. But before we get into that, let me ask you this. What if I told you that the choices you make with your credit card today could dramatically impact your financial future tomorrow? Does that intrigue you? Well, stick around because today we're answering the burning question. What are 10 things I should never do with my credit card? Now, yesterday we talked about finding joy in the mundane. We explored how God's presence can transform even the most ordinary tasks into moments of purpose and moments of gratitude. And if you missed it, I want to remind you to go back and listen to it. It might just change your perspective on those everyday chores you've been dreading. All right, well, let's kick things off with a message from one of our listeners. This is a great question. It comes from Belinda, and she writes this. Hey, Ralph, I've been a faithful listener of your show for months now, and I can't tell you how much it's helped me. But I'm writing today because I'm in a bit of a pickle. I've always prided myself on being responsible with my money, but lately my credit card debt has been creeping up. It started with a few emergency expenses, but now I find myself using my card for things I know I shouldn't. I am worried I'm headed down a dangerous path. What advice do you have for someone who wants to use credit cards wisely and avoid those pitfalls? Belinda, I want to thank you for your honesty and for reaching out. That is a situation that, listen, I found myself in, and I'm sure many people find themselves in. And I'm glad you're seeking guidance now before things get way too far out of hand. Your question is exactly what we're going to be talking about on today's show. Now, speaking of questions, I want to remind you that this show is all about answering your financial questions from that Christian perspective. And if you've got a question you'd like me to address on this show, just head over to justaskralph.com and submit it. Truth is, your question could be featured on one of our future episodes. And when I was looking at Belinda's question, I thought about, what would be a great Bible verse? And I found this one. And it doesn't speak directly to credit card use, but I thought it was perfect. And it comes from Proverbs chapter 22:7. And it's one we've used on the show before. And it says this, "The rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is a slave to the lender." Now that is powerful, but it's a powerful reminder of the bondage that debt can create in our lives when we misuse our credit cards. The truth is, we are essentially borrowing money we don't have. Oftentimes, it's at high interest rates, and this can quickly lead to a situation where we feel enslaved to our debts. We're constantly working just to make those minimum payments. But I've got some great news for you today. And that's God's word doesn't just warn us about the dangers of debt, it also provides wisdom for managing our finances wisely. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Now picture this. It's a cool autumn morning. I think it was back in 2019. I'm sitting in my office as I often do. I'm preparing for my next client to come in. My next client, I looked on my schedule, is a guy named Barry. Now Barry has been a client of mine for years. Walks in and I can immediately see right away. I can see that Barry had the weight of the world on his shoulders. Now, I've known Barry for years. Barry's usually this jovial guy, always has a smile, always cracks a joke, but today he was different. He seemed really grim. He sits down, he takes a deep breath, and he says, "Ralph, I'm in trouble." Now, when I hear that, I know I've got my work cut out for me. Next thing he says, "Ralph, I've got $50,000 in credit card debt, and I don't even know how I got here." He went on to share how he was using his credit card to pay for everything. And the truth is, his credit card had grown so large that he was only able to make the minimum payments. Now listen, I've been there. I'm sure many of the other listeners have been there. He said to me, he says, "Ralph, I'm opening new credit cards because he didn't have any available credit on the existing cards." And then he started telling me the worst situation ever, and that's he started missing payments. And he was wrecking his credit. The truth is, I looked at Barry and I said, "Barry, you're in the credit card death spiral." And he began to share more of his story. But I could see his whole demeanor. He needed to share this with somebody. But as he was telling it, I was right there with him. It reminded me of my past. Because truth is, there was a time when I too was drowning in credit card debt. And I'm going to tell my story later in the show. But let's talk about Barry. Because the truth is, Barry's story is a cautionary tale of how easily credit card debt can spiral out of control. And as he and I talked, I identified 10 critical mistakes he'd made. And these are mistakes that I want you to avoid at all costs. So let's jump right into those. And the first one is this: never use your credit card for cash advances. I don't care how nice they make it, how great they send you checks. You get your credit card statement, just sign this check and, you'll get a cash advance. And see, Barry had fallen into that trap using his credit card to get cash when he was short on funds. And what Barry didn't realize, and a lot of people don't understand this, those cash advances are often at a different interest rate. And usually those rates are sky high. And they normally charge a fee. I liken it to kind of sort of like throwing gasoline on a financial fire. So you never want to use your credit card for cash advances. Number 2, and Barry was doing this, don't make only the minimum payments. Barry shared with me, he said, Ralph, for months, I've been scraping by only making that minimum payment on the cards. But here's the thing you need to understand. Minimum payments are designed to keep you in debt. That's the goal of the credit card company. By making that payment, you are being kept in that debt. Truth is, when you look at the statement, minimum payments barely even cover the interest. And most of the time, they leave the principal balance untouched, especially, and listen to this one, especially if you're like Barry and you're making late payments because they're adding that late fee onto it. So number 2, don't ever just make the minimum payments. Number 3, this one is crucial for your credit score. And that's avoid maxing out your credit cards. This is exactly what Barry did. He maxed out several cards thinking, well, you know what? I'll pay that one off later. He got into this debt spiral, this credit card debt spiral that I call it. And what he didn't realize is as he was allowing his credit utilization ratio to grow, it was nailing his credit score. I talked about this on the show a couple weeks ago. And the problem with that is as he was getting over that 30, 40, 50, the truth is in Barry's case, when we looked at his actual cards, he was at 100 or even 100, over 100% of the credit utilization. And he had zero financial cushion for emergencies. He couldn't use his credit cards because they were all maxed out. And what he had been doing is getting another credit card and then another credit card and then another credit card. So avoid maxing out your credit cards. But that leads me to number 4, and that's never use one credit card to pay off another. And see, this is what Barry was doing. He had this desperate attempt to juggle his debts. He started using one credit card to make payments on the other. And think about it. I'm going to use this analogy. It's like digging a hole to fill another hole. And all that does is make the problems worse. And trust me, I've been there. I've done that. I'll talk about that later in this show. But you never want to use one credit card to pay off another. I'm going to give a little bit of a caveat to that, though. If you are diligent and you can find a better interest rate on credit card B, and you're going to pay off credit card A and close credit card A, then I'll say that's okay. But generally, you never want to use one credit card to pay off another. So let's move on to number 5. And that's don't use your credit cards for everyday purchases you can't afford. Now, I want to be careful that you hear what I'm saying here. I'm not saying to not use your credit card for everyday purchases. What I'm saying is don't use your credit card for everyday purchases that you can't afford. And see, this was the trap that Barry had fallen into. He was using his credit card for groceries. He was using those for gas and other daily expenses, even though he knew, and this is the critical part, he couldn't pay off the balance at the end of the month. See, that's the key to this whole thing. If you want to use your credit card for everyday purchases, I think that's fantastic. I think that's a good financial decision. So long as you are able to pay off that balance at the end of each billing cycle. Because in Barry's case, he wasn't doing that. And that led to a constant accumulation of debt. Because he was taking the January purchases, rolling them into February. When the statement came, he couldn't pay the whole January statement. So then those charges rolled into March. And then the February, you understand, it just kept on going and going. It was this vicious cycle. And in his case, he was opening up another card because he was tapping out those credit limits. So, like I said, don't ever use your credit card for everyday purchases you can't afford. Number 6, and this one gets a lot of people in trouble, and trust me, I've been here and done this one. Avoid making large purchases without a repayment plan. And this was one of Barry's biggest mistakes. You know, Barry was out shopping one day. He was at the Best Buy store, and he told me, he says, Ralph, man, I found the coolest new TV. I mean, this thing was awesome. He was telling me about an HD this and did this, and, you know, you could stand on one foot. I'm just being funny, but I think he said it was like a 90-inch TV or something ridiculous like that. And that would have been enough. But then he said, you know what, Ralph? What I figured is I've also got to buy some furniture. He comes up to Barry and he says, oh, you like that TV? You know what? And Barry says, oh, yeah, dude, I love this TV. And the guy says, yeah, well, how about some nice, theater seating for your house? Well, that's really cool, but can't really afford that. And the guy from Best Buy, and I'm not picking on Best Buy, the guy from Best Buy was doing his job. He said to Barry, he says, you know, the cool thing is, Barry, you can put all of this on our credit card plan. But see, the problem is Barry didn't have a plan to repay that off quickly. And the truth is, think about this. The interest on these big ticket items, they add up fast. Now, Barry was also enticed by Best Buy's plan where they had 0 interest for 12 months. And Barry's like, oh, this is great. I'm going to get this new TV. I'm going to get this furniture set. I'm going to be, as my dad used to say, living in Fat City. But he didn't have a plan to how to pay that off. And he liked that 12 months no interest. But here's the deal. If you don't pay that off in 12 months, all of that interest starts to accrue from day one. And I did an episode about that, and I'll put a link to it in the show notes. So again, avoid making those large payments if you don't have a repayment plan. Now, my wife and I, we just bought a new Sleep Number bed, and I love this thing. We went on vacation, and I'll tell you, I missed it. But we've got a plan. We did I think it's for them, it's 3 years, no interest. But I've got a plan set up that I'm going to make that payment every month so that by the time we get, even before the plan ends up, we're going to have it paid off. So let's move on to number 7. And this is another one. Barry fell into this pit, and that's never miss a payment. And see, with Barry, it came down to he was juggling these multiple credit cards. And when you're juggling multiple things, sometimes things get dropped. So in Barry's case, he missed a few payments. That triggered late fees. And bigger than that, it also triggered what they call the penalty interest rates. And you got to look at your statements. A lot of times, these credit card companies, if you find yourself making late payments, it will trigger what they call the penalty interest rate, which is a higher rate because guess what? They're taking on more risk now because they start to see you sliding. And when that happened, when he started missing those payments, it made it even harder to manage because not only was he not making the minimum payments, now they were increasing the interest rate and they were adding on the fees. So again, don't ever miss a payment. Let's move on to number 8. And listen, I've been guilty of this one too, and a lot of people do. Don't ignore your credit card statements. And Barry said, dude, when those statements came, they went right into the drawer. He stopped opening them because they stressed him out. But the problem is by Barry not opening them, he wasn't keeping track of his spending and his charges. And bigger than that, he lost some situations where there was fraudulent activity on his card. And he couldn't dispute the errors because they had been months and months ago. So this is the thing I'm going to say right now. Always, always, always read your statements and consider setting up online alerts, just like with your checking account. A lot of credit card companies now, you can set up an online alert that will alert you anytime there's a charge. And a lot of people might say, Ralph, that gets redundant. Yes, it might get redundant, but if all of a sudden you're doing your daily business and you get a pop-up that says you spent money, and let's say you live in Delaware like me, and all of a sudden there's some charges from Las Vegas, Nevada, you're going to say, wait a minute, you're going to call that credit company and put a stop to it before it's too late. Let's move on to number 9. And Barry was guilty of this one too. And that's you got to avoid applying for multiple cards in a short period of time. Now, in Barry's case, his goal was he was trying to get more credit. He needed it. He needed it to fund his lifestyle. So he'd applied for several new cards within a few months. What this did was this further trashed his credit report because of those hard inquiries. It lowered his credit score. What did that do? Sure, he may have gotten extra credit cards, but they came at a higher interest rate because all of a sudden his credit score was lower. So again, avoid applying for multiple cards in a short period of time. And number 10, I can't stress this one enough. You probably heard me say that before, but it's the truth. Never, ever, I mean never, use your credit card for gambling or speculative investments. And see, Barry found himself in that trap as well. He shared with me, he said, Ralph, I had this I thought I could get out of debt. He says, I had this last ditch effort. I wanted to get out of debt. So he started using his credit card for some online gambling. He thought, if I can hit it, I can pay off all this credit card debt right away. But guess what? That was a bad plan because then he just ran up more debt. I've had other clients that have used the credit cards for risky stock purchases. And needless to say, this usually only deepens his financial holes for people. So I listened to Barry's story. I felt a deep sense of empathy because, listen, I've been there. I've been Barry. Maybe some of you have been Barry as well. I remember it was about 25 years ago. I was a young entrepreneur. I was full of ambition. I had an accounting degree, but what they teach you in school is not financial wisdom. So the truth was I was short on financial wisdom. And I thought, hey, I could use these credit cards to fund my dreams, and I'm going to bridge the gap between that time until I get my big break. And listen, before I knew it, I was $30,000 in debt. I had credit cards calling me. They were calling me all hours. And it really challenged my faith. My faith was wavering. And I remember one day I was sitting at my kitchen table one night. I had the bills all spread out before me. And I was feeling hopeless. And I said to God, what can I do to get out of this? And God spoke to me. I heard this small voice, and it reminded me of Matthew 6:33. And what does Matthew 6:33 says this? It says, but seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. And as I sat there at my kitchen table with the bill spread out, I was feeling terrible. I realized I had been putting my trust in credit cards instead of God. I thought those credit cards were going to be the answer to the questions that were going to make me feel good about myself. I had been seeking financial security through borrowing when I should have been doing it through wise stewardship, because God had already given me so many things. But I sat there and felt sorry for myself. But then I finally realized God's given me so much. And for me, that was a turning point. And I committed right at that moment, I am getting out of this debt, not for my own sake, because it was an act of obedience and trust in God. It wasn't easy. Listen, if you've been in that credit card death spiral, you know it's not easy. It's hard work. It takes effort. It takes time. If you want me to work with you, I'll talk to you a little bit about how I can help you. It took discipline for me. It took sacrifice. It took going to the store and decide not to buy things. It was a complete overhaul of my financial habits. But what I learned is step by step, I added prayer, I added perseverance. I climbed out of that dead hole. I started by creating a budget. And here's the thing, you can create a budget, or as a friend of mine I interviewed last week said, an intentional spending plan. But the bigger thing is I created a budget, but I stuck to it. I stuck to it religiously. I cut up all but one of my credit cards and used cash for most of my purchases. In my case, I took on some extra work and I put every spare dollar towards my debt. And the biggest thing I learned, and if you listen to nothing else I say today, I learned to distinguish between needs and wants. And that's not easy. I found myself often saying, is this purchase bringing me closer to financial freedom or pushing me further into bondage? And listen, I told you, this didn't happen overnight. This took 3 years of hard work. But there was a point where I sat at that kitchen table again and I was debt-free. And let me tell you this, the feeling of making that last payment was indescribable. Trust me, I've had many clients that said the same thing. It was indescribable. That feeling was amazing. It wasn't just financial freedom I gained. It was a deeper trust in God's provision and a commitment to steward his resources wisely. Now look, you might be saying to yourself, Ralph, that sounds good, but That's not the reality. So, in preparation for today's show, I did some looking at the current landscape of credit card use. And it's scary. These are some recent statistics. Did you know the average American household carries $6,270 in credit card debt? That was amazing to me. And that U.S. consumer debt stands at a staggering, listen to this, $14.96 trillion. And here's the scarier of all of that. Credit card balances accounted for $807 billion of that. But here's the even more sobering statistic, and this one made me upset. Did you know the average credit card interest rate is now 16.28%? You might ask, what does that mean? Well, that means if you're carrying a balance, nearly a sixth of your debt is growing each year just in interest. And these numbers, they underscore the importance of why using credit wisely is so important. Now listen, credit cards can be useful tools for building credit and managing cash flow. I've talked about that. I'm not sitting here and bad-mouthing credit cards, but they can also be dangerous if they're misused. So I promised you at the beginning of the show, I'd give you some tips on how to avoid the pitfalls of credit card misuse. And here are a few. I don't want to take a lot of time, but I'm going to hit them real quick. And that is number one, as I talked about, create a budget and stick to it. You know exactly how much you can afford and spend it each month, and don't spend more than that. Now, you also, number two, you can use cash or a debit card for everyday purchases. And then save that credit card for planned purchases. Now listen, I am not a big fan of debit cards. I did a show a week or two ago about that. But if you are finding yourself in that credit card debt spiral, maybe going back to a debit card is a good choice. Number three, if you've got to use a credit card, this one is a must. You've got to pay the full balance each month. Because that way you're going to avoid that interest. You're going to avoid rolling those charges forward. Number four, can't stress this one enough. Set up automatic payments to ensure you never miss a due date. You don't want to be like Barry and making your problems worse. Number five, review those credit card statements for any error or fraudulent charges and see where you're actually spending your money. Number six, I did a show about this a couple weeks ago as well. If you're struggling with debt, consider seeking help from a financial advisor or schedule an appointment with me, and I'll talk to you about how to do that in just a moment. And most importantly, this is a faith and finance show. Just like I found myself sitting at that kitchen table. I had exhausted everything I knew to do, and I'm a finance professional. But this is the time to pray for wisdom in managing your finances. Remember this, do what I did. Start by remembering that everything we have is a gift from God, and we're called to be good stewards of His resources. So Belinda, I know I haven't mentioned you in a few moments here, but I hope this discussion has given you some insight in how to use your credit cards wisely. And remember, listen to me on this one. It's not about never using credit cards. Credit cards aren't bad. It's about using them responsibly as part of a larger God-centered financial strategy. And listen, if you're feeling overwhelmed by your financial situation, I want you to know there's hope. Whether you're in Barry's shoes, drowning in debt, or like Belinda trying to avoid financial pitfalls, I'm here to help you. I'm going to invite you to schedule a one-on-one consultation with me. Because listen, I know how to fix these issues. I've been working in this since 1994. Yes, that's 30 years if you're listening today. And I am 100% certain if we work together, you're going to be able to overcome these difficult issues. This is what I do every day. That's my passion. And listen, I can't work for free, so I do charge a $150 consultation fee. But I will work with you one-on-one to create a personalized plan to improve your personal finances. Maybe it's not credit card debt. Maybe you're looking for somebody to help you grow your business or do the accounting for your business. My goal is to help you achieve all your financial goals. Just head over to AskRalph.com, click on the banner that says book a call with Ralph, and then just fill in the blanks. And together we can create a roadmap to financial freedom that aligns with your faith and values. Now you might be saying, Ralph, I don't have $150 to spend. I get it. But I can guarantee you this, and I'll stand by this. I am certain you'll save hundreds more than that consultation fee. In fact, I'll guarantee it. If you don't find at least $150 in savings after a call, I will refund the consultation fee. I don't know how much else I can say that. You will find value in this. Work with me. We'll work together and we'll get you out of this debt spiral, this debt hole, because there is hope. Now, before I close today, I want to give you a sneak peek of tomorrow's episode. Tomorrow, we're discussing what are the 7 top debt collection scams to avoid. I got some stories for you tomorrow. You don't want to miss this one. It could truly save you from falling victim to some pretty nasty schemes. So remember this, my passion is to help you achieve financial success. I want you to live out your dreams and I want you to grow in your faith. I know working together, we can master your finances from a Christian perspective. So as I always say, stay financially savvy and God bless you.
Thank you for joining us on the Ask Ralph podcast. And with a simple click to subscribe, we'll invite you back to our next episode. And remember, financial issues don't have to be complicated. Just ask Ralph. The information contained in this episode of Ask Ralph is based on data available as of the date of its release. Saggio Accounting Plus and Ask Ralph Media, Inc. is under no obligation to update this content if changes occur. Applying this information to your specific situation requires careful consideration of all facts and circumstances, and any information provided is not to be considered as financial, tax, or legal advice. Please consult your tax advisor or attorney before acting on any material covered.